John Sargent with the Alarm Museum.
And I'm Ralph W. Sevinor from the Alarm Museum. Welcome.
And we're here today at ADT corporate headquarters with Holly Borgmann, Vice President of Government Affairs at ADT. Holly, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
And we've got a couple things that you can tell us about that a lot of people in the industry don't really know about. What are the workings of the government affairs? And but I'd first like to start with when you were a young girl and growing up. Did you have any career aspirations, anything you wanted to do or were looking at doing in your life?
Sure. So I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was never going to leave Ohio, but I loved government and I loved reading about what was going on in government. So I was pretty set on the path that I was going to go into journalism. I studied journalism in high school. I was on the yearbook and the student paper, and I majored in journalism in college. But I started to realize that I didn't like writing about policy as much as I actually just enjoyed making policy, drafting policy, studying policy. So I shifted to political science. I ended up majoring in both of those.
Oh, interesting. And so you sort of had journalism first, but then actual government type work to get involved in. So then after that point, where did you go first in your career?
So I went to the state legislature in Ohio and I participated in an internship program. It was very competitive to get in, where they would match us with random members of the state legislature to work for a year. And I was so lucky in that I got appointed to work for two of, I think, the best members of the state legislature at the time. So one was the chair of the Republican Party in Cleveland, and the other was the first woman to serve as lieutenant governor and governor of the state of Ohio. And then after she served that term, she moved to the State House. And so to learn from the two of them was an incredible opportunity. We worked a lot on economic development issues, particularly in the Appalachian region of Ohio, where the unemployment rate when times were good was at 20%. So we learned the importance that a job can have on an individual and a family. And we worked to try to attract jobs to that area as opposed to just trying to find ways to get people out of that community to the jobs.
Interesting. So you really just jumped right into this type of work. Yeah. So that's interesting. How long did you do that?
So I was there for a year and a half. So I worked for those two members, and then I worked as the secretary for the Commerce and Labor Committee, which was a nighttime committee, which they would hold at night so that business people could attend the hearings. And I kept track of all of the bills that were going through the committee, all of the testimony. I monitored environmental issues for the caucus, but we also tried to keep bills on track to figure out which ones were close to coming out of committee, which ones still had work to be done. Mm-hmm. So I got to see the process behind the legislative process. It's not just how a bill, just a bill on Capitol Hill and how a bill becomes a law. There's a lot that goes into the sausage making.
Right.
And to get to see it up close and see how decisions are made and how bills can get waylaid or take paths towards obsolescence. So it was a great learning experience.
So were you having fun? Were you enjoying it?
I loved it. I
Really?
loved the people. Again, I was never going to leave Ohio, so it was the best place for me. But then I saw a job that opened up working on tobacco issues with Philip Morris in New York City. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do that for a year, and then I'll come back to Ohio.
So was that like a lobbyist they were looking for? Or?
Kind of a quasi-lobbying role, so tracking public place smoking and smoking bans, working on that issue, which was so contentious at the time, but covering 50 states plus the federal government plus Puerto Rico. Whenever an issue came up, we would draft a campaign to figure out how we were going to amend, kill, pass a law, trying to figure out what would benefit the industry, working with industry partners as a coalition to develop a workaround or maybe a path forward for the business. It was a fantastic place to learn.
Wow, yeah. So then, and you enjoyed that too?
Loved it. I loved it so much that I ended up staying for 4 years. I got to know the people. My job changed a little bit. I picked up tax issues and then all grassroots activities. So grassroots is an accompaniment to lobbying, where instead of directly meeting with the legislators to say, please vote this way or vote against that bill, you work with groups and ask them to call the legislature or to encourage them to reach out. In a lot of cases, people don't realize the power they have as an individual or a small business or even an association until someone says, this is how you can do it, and you introduce them to the legislators. It's empowering. You give them that ability to do it. They follow the issue, they're more engaged, they have a share of the
So you're teaching also.
Absolutely. And so it was a phenomenal experience, and we got to see which kinds of messages worked, which ones didn't, ways that we built up the community, because if we built up our volunteer base, then it helped us down the road. Or to have strong associations benefits everybody.
Mm-hmm. Did you have, in those early days, what were the challenges? I mean, did you have things that, roadblocks you ran into, or?
Oh, absolutely. Working for the tobacco industry, we had very few friends.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to say that they were close with Big Tobacco or that they shared Big Tobacco's concerns. They wouldn't take our political contributions. But what we did have on our side was logic. And so we could say, you might hate us, but this policy here does not make sense. And so we had to rely entirely on the facts to pass bills.
Interesting. So then did you go to ADT after that, or was there some other stuff you did?
So I worked
And
for,
how did you? Yeah.
so I worked in tobacco for a while, then I worked with the parent company, and then they spun off the food business, so I went to Kraft Foods, and I got to learn with great people. Again, I think the key to anyone's success is to work for good people.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna make or break any individual's career, and I've had the opportunity to work with phenomenal people. So when I worked at Kraft, I got to learn new issues that impacted the food business from a regulatory standpoint, a legislative
Now, were
standpoint.
you back in Ohio at that point?
No, I never made it back to Ohio. So then I was in Washington DC at the time, but I got to learn the process in DC, learn the people, learn the pace, the language, which DC was not for me. I love the museums, I like the people, but I like being in a business where you can actually experience the P&L impact that policy has. It keeps you, I think, closely tied to the business. People are making things. It's a different type of environment. So one day, and I think this was maybe a year or so after, we had Snowmageddon in DC, and there were 2 blizzards in 1 week, and I was kind of sick of shoveling out my car just
And
to
they
go
don't
to
know
work.
snow from there.
No. And so, I grew up in Ohio, so I knew how to shovel, but I knew that I didn't enjoy it either. And then I'm sitting at my desk. I was paying a fortune to live in a small 1-bedroom apartment in DC, and even the dog had to pay $40 a month in pet rent to live in this apartment. I see this job opening in Boca Raton, Florida, doing government affairs, and I was like, I've never been there, but that sounds amazing. They should advertise all of their jobs in February. And so I was like, even if I just go to interview, that'll be a nice little trip down. And I met Paul Pluffjohn, who was my boss, who became my boss here. Was just a wonderful person. And when I met him, I was like, this is a guy that I want to work for. And I got to meet the team, and they were fantastic. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I can see myself living here. Driving back to the airport past palm trees. It was amazing. How could you not take that opportunity?
Yeah.
And since then, I've been at ADT 9 years now.
So what year was that when you came here?
2013.
Okay. So that was right after the Tyco spinoff, where ADT
Yes.
became itself.
But Tyco was still in our building. They were on one
Yeah.
side, we were on the other.
Right.
So I would see Jay Hahn in the cafeteria. And it was a nice opportunity, because for me, in government affairs, I don't really compete against the industry.
Mhm.
There are many, like in marketing, sales, there's more natural competition. But for me, if there's a win for me, it's probably a win for you, Ralph, for you, John, for everybody in the industry.
Right.
Because we're looking for something that helps everybody.
Mm.
And so the opportunity to pick Jay Hahn's brain at the cafeteria as I was learning the business was a great opportunity. And he's someone that I still value his opinion all these years. And I think he's had 5 jobs since. But it was a great learning opportunity.
Yeah. So I know you started here with Paul. What were some of the first things that you started working on and dealing with?
So the first bill we worked on was permitting in Florida. And so for states that, if you're in a state that is not Florida, you should be jealous, because we have a system that we've built in place, and it took years to get there, where we have a standardized permitting system. No matter which jurisdiction you're in, the permit application is the same. You can buy the permits in advance if it's a low voltage system and it doesn't require a fire plan. You can buy them in advance. There's a cap on the fees that can be charged. I think it's $40. You can start work same day, next day. You put the permit application in the window. You notify the city that the work is beginning, and then they can do the inspection once it's complete. And so when we first got here, there were some cities that were charging $250 for a permit. And we would advertise, or you see advertised on TV, like $99 install plus a $250 permit application.
Wow.
People thought it was bait and switch.
Mm.
The money didn't go to ADT, but it was price prohibitive for some people who were budget constrained, but also concerned about their security. And so since we've passed that, we've seen sales go up, and people who maybe experience a break-in in their neighborhood are able to get protection same day, next day, which is a game changer for them and people who are concerned about their safety.
Mhm.
But I think soon after, that's when we started seeing some of the false alarm issues come up out of California.
Yeah,
I think it was it Chico?
Chico is a big one. We actually, speaking from the California Alarm Association, prepared a lawsuit because the police chief just would not budge, and the city council, was letting him go his own way. He wanted to go to verified response, and then said, well, I'm gonna fine you for everything. You can pay the false alarm fines.
Which doesn't make sense, because when you think about it, 80% of false alarms are caused by 20% of the users, and it's almost always a behavioral thing. If it's a mechanical issue, we want to go in as an alarm company and fix that problem. But the chronic abusers are generally behavior oriented and need retraining, and the best way to get their attention is through an escalating series of fines that are assessed to the user.
Yeah.
So it's like sending a false alarm or sending a speeding ticket to Honda. It's not going to change the driver's behavior, and Honda has no ability to impact how someone lawfully operates their product or
Yeah.
lawfully.
Yeah.
When you explained it like that, which really makes common sense, right? To the legislators, did they understand it, or did they?
So at the
And
state,
the police also, by the way.
the state absolutely. The cities, not so much.
Not so
They
much, really.
it's an issue for the cities. They're looking at it from a revenue perspective. They want to try new things, and they've not really considered, is this constitutional? Does this give somebody the right to confront their accuser? Is it constitutional to fine somebody who's not at fault?
Even a party, right?
And so for them, it's in some cases, not most cities, obviously, but the handful that have tried this, I think they have best intentions. And they're doing it out of frustration because false alarms are too high.
Right.
And we as an industry, I think, own a part of that, where we need to work with our customers and our own business people to drive down that number of false alarms, and we have. Unfortunately, when you talk about the percentage of false alarms that are out there, the percentage is still too high, but the overall number has come way down, thanks in part to the technology, two-call verification that we've adopted, new features that we're using to verify that an alarm is actually merited, but we own a part of that too. And I think sometimes the relationships fall apart a little bit, or a new city manager maybe hasn't built that relationship with the alarm industry and hasn't addressed the issue, and instead came up with an idea, and we disagreed. We didn't think that was gonna fix the problem. So by going to the states, we've said, we agree that this is an issue and we wanna help drive down the number of false alarms, but this will not do that. This will not solve that problem. And so working with the states, we've been able to draft legislation, not the model ordinance, but draft legislation that establishes guidelines so that cities can adopt a false alarm ordinance that will address their issue and it's catered to their community, but has guidelines in place so they don't spend time going down a path that they don't want to. Because in the end, if they pass a false alarm ordinance that fines the alarm company for a customer's false alarm, it's not going to drive down the number of false alarms. The industry may file suit. The industry has to fund that. The city has to fund it.
Yeah.
Relationships are free.
Right, no winners.
Nobody wins.
Yeah.
We want to maintain good relationships with first responders because that's our most important stakeholder next to our customer.
So Holly, this is, so it's really not an ADT problem, it's an industry
Of
problem.
course, yeah.
So what would you say, I'm in Massachusetts, so a couple locations, what would you say to me to help in this? Because it's not just an ADT problem, it's an industry. What can I do as a local company?
So first, make sure that you're abiding at bare minimum by the law and best practices. 2-call verification confirmation is a great first place to start. Maybe take a look at your phone lists every now and then and see, do you have numbers, good working numbers for everybody? Reach out to your local elected officials, reach out to the police chiefs. If you have customers
Be
that are
proactive.
of course, if you develop a relationship with the person that's managing the false alarm issues, they can call you and say, hey, Ralph, we're noticing an uptick in false alarms, or we're getting a lot of call outs from this particular address. Is there something you can do? Because they just want the problem to be fixed.
Right.
And you want the problem to be fixed. So I think by establishing those relationships early on, we can avoid a scenario like what happened in Sandy Springs, where the relationships frayed. And to counter what happened in Sandy Springs, we had an issue in Greenville, South Carolina last year. The city manager from Sandy Springs moved to Greenville and wanted to institute the same type of ordinance.
I'll be darned. I didn't know that.
And so we were, oh God, we're gonna have to do this again, this is gonna be terrible, and we were braced for a fight. And then we took a step back, we all kind of collectively took a breath, and we went about it a totally different way. So I hired a firm that had relationships in Greenville, and we met with the city manager, we met with the chief of police, we met with the alarm management group, and with an open mind, sat down and said, what problems are you having? Let's talk about this. What is your ordinance that you have in place? Have you implemented the ordinance that you've passed? And in some cases, I think in Greenville, they had not implemented all of the measures that were in their ordinance. They weren't requiring the 2 calls. They weren't requiring registration. And so we built that relationship slowly, but it was built on trust. We worked with SEAC after we had that initial meeting. SEAC had a good meeting. We started introducing the South Carolina Electronic Security Association into the debate. And we have a good relationship now with Greenville. They changed their ordinance so that they require verified response for those customers that have a certain number of false alarms per year.
The ones that just can't get it together.
Which is totally reasonable, I think. And they will reach out to the people that they have on their contact list that they've been meeting with and been having calls with from time to time to say, we're starting to have an issue here, or we've noticed that not every company has registered their users and we're gonna start levying fines at this date. But it's become a good working relationship. So we were able to avoid a bad outcome by investing in the relationships up front.
Did you get to educate the city manager?
The city manager, I think, eventually came along. I think that he might have been a little more skeptical than the rest, but was willing to give it a try. But in the end, I think
He saw value.
I think
That's
so. And we have allies, and now we're working on a bill in South Carolina. It's in the second house right now, like the Georgia bill, that would ban municipalities from fining alarm companies for a customer's false alarms. But we wanted to get Greenville's buy-in before we ran a bill like that. We wanted to talk with them and make sure they knew what we were doing, because we don't want to sacrifice that relationship that we've built.
Yeah.
Can you break down Sandy Springs from the beginning? Maybe just give me a little overview of that.
So Sandy Springs, and it's not as fresh in my mind as maybe it should be.
And John, you may be able to add to that.
Yeah, well, it's a smaller community compared to some of the big ones that we've had to deal with.
Right outside Atlanta.
Yeah. But, you know, it's the classic case, and I haven't said this in quite a while, but there is a handful, you probably count them on one hand, of jurisdictions in the United States that are dead set, and they've just got this mentality about the alarm industry, that the alarm industry are bad guys. You're making money off the backs of my officers that are responding to anything but false alarms. And they put that out there in different ways of communication, and so they put a poison pill, so to speak, in a police chief, or not often a sheriff, but a police chief's mind, and that this exists, and it's actually not a reality. It's something that is their personal experience, but then they share it. And this is where things started to spread in the early 2000s with a couple jurisdictions that we had wanting to go to verified response, and then the next idea was, okay, well, I'll punish you. I'm gonna fine you for all the false alarms. You can pass it on to your customer. Well, I think that was the case in Sandy Springs, that they believed that situation, and they were determined, well, I'm gonna make the difference here. And it's the same thing I saw in Avondale, Arizona, and God, there's so many jurisdictions that started to go that way, and the few that went that way then ended up backing out. Dallas being the biggest of all that went to verified response. Crime went up, and then they went back to responding. San Jose is another one that this happened in. And the former chief of San Jose dropped the verified response and went back to responding. And that chief is now the chief in Dallas, and Dallas are responding. So, looking back, that's this little thing that crystallized and started this. But of course, it hasn't caught on because, the obvious is, well, that doesn't make sense, for one thing. But there are better solutions and proven methods, best practices that will reduce false alarms. I would like to hear about Sandy Springs, just in your experience, but then I kind of want to go back to the state, and if you could kind of lead us through the steps of how do you do that? You have had a phenomenal success with the state government work, and a lot of people don't know, what you do to go through that, and maybe you could give us a thumbnail sketch of that. But which do you want to do first, Sandy Springs?
So we can do Sandy Springs. So Sandy Springs, they passed a number of ordinances. They would pass an ordinance and then not even really wait to see how it impacted behavior before passing another. But they came out with two policies in the end. One it said that they would send the false alarm fines to the alarm company. And then the second required something called true verification, which was, a verified response. Basically, you needed to have a guard or a camera, and I would imagine they had very few false alarms if they implemented the verified
Right.
response or the true verification. And so for us, we
Or,
had
or a fine. Or a fine.
horrified. So, but I mean, how many false alarms would there even be
Right.
if you implemented a verified response type of scenario? And it did seem very hostile to the alarm industry, but I think some of that was that we talked a lot at each other and not enough to each other. So we had press releases that were maybe not so kind, and they responded. And I think in the end, we need to develop those relationships with law enforcement first before it becomes adversarial. And then we need to handle our disagreements first behind closed doors and give people the opportunity to do the right thing. And that is helpful. That situation, it got out of hand. So we were able to talk with the members of the legislature, say this is the issue that we have. We hired a lobbying firm, but a lot of the work was really done by John Loud and members of the alarm community in Georgia that were impacted or were concerned that they could be impacted if their city were to adopt a similar ordinance. And working together, we would have calls. John Loud was sort of a campaign manager in Georgia, talking to the individual alarm company owners who operated in an individual jurisdiction, maybe not more than a couple of towns, but say, okay, who covers this legislator's house? Who has a relationship with this person? Because almost every member of the legislature had an alarm.
Sure.
And they had a relationship generally with the owner of that company.
Mhm.
So they were able to reach out and have those one-on-one discussions with the legislator who was going to be deciding this. And we testified in committee. We made sure that we presented the facts. And in the end, logic prevailed. But we were able to base that ordinance on something that we'd already passed in California and in Florida.
Mhm.
It's the law in Iowa, Louisiana, New Jersey. So each time one passes, it helps to build this, because when we go to a legislature and say, you don't have this problem yet, but you might down the road.
Right.
And so we'd like you to consider passing something that will provide guardrails so that we don't have a situation that spirals out of control that will not have an impact on false alarms.
That's well thought out. That's amazing, right?
Well,
The problem hasn't happened yet, but it's like technology. Technology is moving so fast, and you mentioned it earlier, the rules haven't kept up with it.
Right, we need to make sure that we have the ability to grow.
Right.
But I keep coming back to the point that we as an industry need to do a good job at reducing false alarms. We can't expect the law enforcement community to never change its response if we aren't changing the way we act. We know that false alarms are an issue, and we need to do everything we can to drive that number down. If it's implementing new technology, if it's working with our chronic alarm abusers, updating phone lists, making sure that we're abiding by 2-call confirmation, whether it's required by law or not. That's incumbent upon us.
One of the interesting things, I know in Florida, they take it very seriously on the false alarm side, because even on their continuing education for licensure, they have a certain segment on false alarm education and how to educate the consumer and how to make systems less prone to false alarms. And Florida's really ahead of the curve on that. And I'm going to take that back to Massachusetts and see if we can add to some of their education too. Because you're right, it really is. It starts from the installer and the salesperson right up.
I know, I was so embarrassed. I had 2 false alarms in one night with my smoke detector. I was having my house tented for termites.
Right.
And no one had told me this, and I never even considered that when they pump in
The mist.
Yeah, the smoke detectors are activated by particulates in the air, not necessarily smoke.
Obscuration, yeah.
So of all people, to have 2 false alarms in one night, and I missed the call because it was in my purse, and I wasn't in my home, obviously.
It's embarrassing.
I was so
Especially when you're in the business, right?
Yes, and I have relationships with law enforcement here. I apologize again to the Boca Fire Department.
Yeah. So we take California. How do you start the program for a state that has nothing? You have to, I guess, go and speak to the. Can you kind of guide us through that?
Sure. So I think it's easy enough to just say we're going to hire lobbyists, find a sponsor, and run the bill. But you're missing a few steps. So first, you want to talk with the association. You want to talk with other companies that are in the business to make sure that everyone's aligned. Nobody wants to be surprised, because if you're surprised by something, your first instinct is going to be like, no, I don't want to see this. So consult, bring everyone along, make sure everyone's on board, share the information. Then, before any bill is introduced, you want to have conversations with the law enforcement groups in the state to make sure that they're okay with it and that they're not surprised. They might not be supportive, but if they're neutral, but answer their questions in the beginning. How will this impact existing false alarm ordinances in the state? How will this impact the issue of false alarms? And what is our intent? And then we talk with the local government associations, because those are the 2 groups, law enforcement and local government organizations.
Is that like the League of Cities or something?
The League of Cities, okay. If there's cities and counties, each state has different organizations, but talk with them ahead of time before the bill is introduced. Let them know it's coming. Let them know that they may get calls, but this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because if they are able to answer calls when they get an angry call from one of their cities or counties or a police department, they're able to have that conversation that we had with them to explain this is what the intent is. Because in the end, this is not a bill to shield the alarm industry from fines. This is a bill to reduce the number of false alarms.
Yeah.
We are trying to drive that number down, and we know that the best way to do that, or what studies have shown, the best way to do it is to find the user who is generating those false alarms.
Yeah. So you initially have your plan together, and people from the industry, to buy into the plan, and then those state related agencies. So then how do you find an author for a bill?
So that's where it helps to have a lobbyist. Because if you have a lobbyist, they know where is the bill going to go, which committee will it be assigned to. And you can try to find somebody who is on that committee, or maybe there's a legislator who traditionally has cared about alarm issues. Because not every legislator I would say nobody for the most part runs for office on a pro or anti-alarm platform.
Yeah.
It's an issue, like most people support public
Right.
safety, they support alarms. They've not really considered our issues.
Mhm.
And so that's probably why most of our bills pass unanimously. It's an issue of prioritization more so than winning skeptical legislators over. So if you take a look at where maybe, if you're a company that wants to advance a bill like this, who represents your business? Try to find somebody in the majority party, whichever party that is, because that will help to get a bill heard in terms of seniority. But in the end, I think having that broad coalition, having the okay from law enforcement and local government is gonna go a long way. Identifying somebody with whom you've got a relationship who's willing to advance the bill, and then having people who are willing to speak in favor of that bill at a hearing is gonna be helpful.
You must do enormous amounts of travel.
A
50
lot.
states, DC,
There are 5
Puerto Rico.
states I've not been to, all in the Midwest for the
Wow.
most part, but I'll get Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and Wyoming.
Mhm.
I'll get there eventually,
Wow,
Yeah.
but I'm on the road quite a bit.
yeah.
That's
Road
why I have
warrior.
my alarm.
Yep, that's right, that's right.
So then did you see any strong pushback in any of the state?
Georgia was tough, because that is the only place where we've run a bill like this that already had an ordinance on the books. Every other state where we've run this type of legislation, and so it requires zero change. And so that's a lot easier for legislators to stomach than to say, we're doing this, and this city is, that they're really proud of this ordinance, and they're gonna have to take it back.
So Sandy Springs, are they now fans of this?
I don't know that they're fans of this, but they're living with it because the
Right.
ordinance says that they cannot send the false alarm fine to the company. So they've crafted a new ordinance and it complies with the state,
Right, so they work together.
yeah,
As best as possible.
as best
right?
as
Yeah.
possible.
And that's all I can ask.
And hopefully, as time goes on, we'll develop a better relationship with Sandy
Right.
Springs because we want to have that partnership. Sandy Springs is a growing city. It's a well-to-do bedroom community of Atlanta. We have a lot of alarm customers there, and we want to make
Right.
sure that we're protecting those people the same as we're protecting people in Atlanta proper.
Right.
Does it help to have the alarm companies come when the bill is actually up and being discussed for public comment?
Absolutely. I think even letters of support help. I know a lot of alarm companies are small family businesses. It's hard for people to take a day off of work and travel to the
Right.
state capital, particularly if the capital is far away. Our capital in Florida is a six and a half hour drive from where I live.
Right.
So it's hard for people to dedicate that time. So letters help as well. Sending the letter to the sponsor of the bill, sending the letter to the legislators that represent that business or that
And the
home.
customers, they may be customers, as you said before.
Absolutely.
Right, interesting. Can you talk a little about SEAC?
Sure. So I'm on the board of
And John, you were
SEAC.
Yeah.
really involved in SEAC
Sure.
also.
And so SEAC has developed a model ordinance for cities that are trying to get a handle on this. And there's sort of a first line of defense when cities are thinking about changing up the ordinance or they want to address the issue of false alarms in their community. SEAC is a resource. They can reach out to them, or they could just go to the website and download a model ordinance that is based on studies and best practices from hundreds or thousands of cities around the country.
And does it cost to, if I have an issue in Massachusetts, can I call?
Of course, I think
Anyone
anybody
can
can
call?
call.
Anyone, a professional company can call?
And any professional company that does call should consider making a contribution to
Yeah.
SEAC, but it is not mandatory.
Okay.
But if we all value the work that they do and we want to see it continue.
Right,
But the cities, there's no charge for a company that isn't a member. There's no charge.
amazing. I don't know if you're aware, and I don't know, John, if you're aware, but we used SEAC once, many years ago, in the town or city where our company is, Lynn, Massachusetts. And I knew there was an ordinance that was coming, and I sort of got lazy. I didn't really follow it. And it got to the 11th hour, and it looked like it was going to pass. And long story short, I called SEAC, and they had flown in 2 days later, and they attended the meeting. And shame on me, I should have been on top of it, right? And they attended the meeting, and it came down to misconception on information. And the ordinance that they proposed, the city proposed, I had attended the meeting with the police chief and the mayor and everyone else, and we walked away and came out with a great ordinance.
It's that partnership and
Great,
getting everyone on the
great
same
success,
page.
and I've been a fan ever since, and I am a contributor, by the way.
Thank you.
So
ADT is as well.
yeah, a big contributor. So thanks for the effort on that, both of you, because I know you're, it's good to be able to have them on a moment's notice and that fast acting team.
Mhm.
When it just points again to the concept of maintaining those strong relationships,
Right.
taking the time to build them, getting to know people. When you see someone as an individual, as a colleague, as opposed to someone behind a badge or a title, it really helps to get to a good place. When you go in with good intentions, when you're honest about this is the information we have, this is where we're trying to go.
Right.
When you can establish that sort of information sharing and that type of environment where everyone is working off of an assumption that you're there for the public interest and you're there to do what's right, you get to a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Holly, what do you see in the future? I mean, you've been so successful. I mean, it just I can't say it enough. What you have helped, get accomplished. What do you see in the future with this situation? You're going to work on more states?
Well, we're going to keep working on more states, and we hope that more states will start working on this, that they'll see the example that's been set in some bellwether states, and they'll take it up on their own. And we would love to see this issue passed everywhere. But I think there are other issues that we can be working on as well. Licensing, permitting, making sure that the regulations that are governing our industry that were written in 1915 still make sense today. Because I would hate to see us develop some new technology and not be able to implement it because there's a regulation that prohibits us from doing something. In California last year, we updated the definition of an alarm system. Because think about what an alarm system looks like today versus what it looked like in, say, 1995. I mean, it's totally different. Nobody's running wires behind the walls anymore, at least in a residential setup for the most part. Wireless sensors. The fact that I can have a setup where if someone rings my doorbell, after a certain time, the lights automatically go on in my living room and I can have a radio come on, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that is helping to keep me safe, but we want to make sure that we can install all of that and that we can adapt to keep our customers safe, but we need the law to reflect that. So what I look at is, I take a look at the legislation that we have that's moving to see if it's going to help us grow, if it's going to help keep customers safe, or if it's going to hinder us. And then trying to keep it, because who knows what direction the industry will go in tomorrow. They could invent something this afternoon that suddenly changes everything we do. And we want to make sure that we can do that. So in Florida, for example, there was a bill that we ran a few years ago. We amended a bill that was moving that said that alarm confirmation, the first call had to go to the home phone number. How many people have home phones anymore? But the law said the first call had to go to the home phone, and then the second call could be made to another number. We want our customers to tell us, how would you like to be communicated with? So we expanded it so that it could go to any number, not just the home
Or
number.
text even.
And that's what we did. We expanded to say that you could also get verification electronically, that you could send a text message, because how many people pick up the phone?
Right.
So we're moving in that direction
that's great.
now.
I didn't realize that you're focused on that as well. So it's not just false alarms, it's also sort of projecting into the future and making sure that the rules, the regulations, the standards, the licensing keeps in track with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then going to things like ISC West and seeing the new devices that are coming out.
Right.
And do we need to start thinking ahead if we're going to roll out a robot? What types of laws would govern our use of robots or drones?
Sure.
I mean, these are things we haven't considered. Do you need an FAA license to operate a drone to check for a false alarm?
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Never thought of it from that perspective. Is that part of ADT's goal, or is that SEAC's as well?
I'm not sure that SEAC is focused on that as much, but there are a lot of industry associations with different focuses.
That are focused on that.
And SEAC plays an important role when it comes to false alarm reduction, but You've got the California Alarm Association, which is tied in with all the Silicon Valley innovation and disruption going on. You've got SIA, which represents a lot of the manufacturers as well as some of the installers. You've got the Electronic Security Association, AICC. Everyone's looking at different angles, different policy positions, different ways that the industry is growing, biometrics, facial recognition. So many things to consider.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we're doing things responsibly. They say that bad headlines lead to bad policy. So we never want to be the ones generating the bad headlines. So we want to operate in a way that earns respect, that we're not afraid to see show up on a newspaper that ADT or another company is doing this. When we operate with our customers, our North Star, we're trying to protect public safety.
Right.
I think the rest follows.
Yeah.
But we need to keep an eye on policy to make sure it doesn't accidentally hinder us from doing
So
something.
from the smallest company to the largest company, we need to stay active.
Absolutely.
That's the takeaway. We need to participate in state and local associations.
And absolutely. And also keep and maintain a relationship with your local elected officials.
Right.
Read the paper. If something is coming, don't assume that somebody else is reporting it or has heard about this. So when you're in
I made the same mistake, right?
right, you see this in the headline like, oh, well, certainly the industry knows about this, but
Right.
they may not.
They may not, right.
Well, this has been really interesting.
A lot of fun.
and
This is
great.
I've
great.
enjoyed this.
Yeah.
guys.
A lot of fun.
So I would like to ask,
And eye-opening.
is there anything that we haven't covered or anything else like you'd like to talk about for a minute?
No, I think, I don't know if this is really relevant to our discussion about policy, but I think we need to do more to bring the next generation really into the
I
industry.
agree.
We're maybe overrepresented at the association side, right? People who've been in the industry a long time and we have those relationships and we know each other, but we need to do a little bit more to bring the younger people in and to get people involved in the industry. So to the extent that companies can spare somebody's time for a little bit and send them to a meeting to develop those relationships, because we all know once someone gets into the alarm industry, they never leave.
Yep.
But we need to
That's
harness
true.
that talent and
Yeah.
keep them. But I think we're all looking forward to welcoming those people. We just don't always get a chance to meet them.
All right, Holly, thank you so much.
It's been a
I
pleasure.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
wonderful. Great time. Thank you so much.
Come down anytime.
All right,
Good to
Thank
be
you.
here.